right. Good afternoon, everybody. I just want to say hello to, just going to check your speakers, okay? So Christine, I've heard you speak. Liz, are you good?
Hi there.
Yeah, great. Maggie, we've heard you. Hannah's here. Lisa's here. Andrea's here. Bailey's here. Tracy's here. And Amy's here. So I'd like to call the meeting to order. And as we normally do, I'd like to acknowledge that the Halifax Regional Municipality is located in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and traditional lands of the Mi'kmaq people. The municipality acknowledges the peace and friendship treaties signed in this territory and recognizes that we are all treaty people. So again, welcome. And I just would like to acknowledge that there are regrets from Councillor Stoddard and regrets received from Sonia. So I expect others will be joining us momentarily because we received no other regrets. So at this point, I'd like to call for approval of the minutes. Are there any errors or omissions to the minutes that were circulated? There being none, then I'd like to have a motion that the minutes of the September 8th, 2022 meeting be approved as circulated.
I'll move.
Moved by Lisa.
I'll second.
Seconded by Liz. All in favor, say aye or wave your hand.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay or say nay. Motion is carried. All right, our next item of business is the approval of the order of business. So you did receive the agenda, and just want to ask if there are any changes that you would like to see to the agenda, or if you're happy to approve it as it's been circulated. And can I have a motion to accept the agenda as circulated?
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't catch who that was.
I think it was Jackie.
Jackie, was that you? I didn't catch who it was.
I can
Yes.
make.
Sorry, it was me. Sorry, I was, that was a bit cryptic. It was me. It's Jackie here.
Okay, thank you, Jackie. So move to accept the order of business and seconded by Christine, I hope. All those in favor indicate by
Aye.
waving your hand or say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? A motion is carried. All right. Is there any business arising from the minutes? Andrea? I don't believe there's any.
No, Chair, there is not.
Okay. Is there any person here at the meeting that would like to declare a conflict of interest? You've seen the agenda, you know what we're going to talk about. Any conflicts of interest? Good, so we'll carry on. So that gets us to the consideration of the deferred business. And last meeting, we talked about the meeting schedule. And there was some discussion about changing the timing of the meeting to begin at 4:30 as opposed to 4. So our meetings would go from 4:30 to 6:30. There was general agreement. Katie basically surveyed people to see if people were agreeable to that. And so the agenda has now been set out with that, or the scheduled meetings has been set out with that revised time. So is there anyone who's prepared to make a motion that we accept this schedule of meetings for 2023?
I move that we accept the 2023 meeting schedule as presented.
All right. Can I have a seconder? Moved by Lisa, seconded by
Christine.
Christine. Thank you, Christine. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Say nay. Motion's carried. All right, and that takes us to correspondence. I don't believe we have any correspondence. I don't believe we have any petitions, and I don't believe we have any presentations. Is that correct, Andrea?
That is correct, Chair. There's no correspondence or petitions from the clerk's office for this.
Okay. And information items brought forward, there are none of those. So that gets us very quickly to our first presentation. We've got lots to do today. So I will turn the floor over to Amy, who's going to give us a presentation on race and gender data and safety of Asian and non-binary and gendered individuals in the HRM. So Amy's going to present. We'll give an opportunity for questions when she's finished, questions or comments, and we'll do that alphabetically by your last name, starting with Haneen and going on down. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much, Jane. Hi, everyone, and I'll just get my screen ready here. That is the wrong. There we go. Okay, can folks see that in full screen? Perfect.
Yes.
Great. So the presentation that I'm going to be giving the committee today is the same presentation that I gave to the Executive Standing Committee. It's a very high-level presentation and sort of draws upon the key points that were brought forward in the report. But in our time for questions and discussion, we can definitely dig into any of the pieces in more detail, and I can share more information if there's anything that you have questions about. So. Yeah, as Jane mentioned, this is the presentation on the report that was written based on the 2 motions that came from the Women's Advisory Committee. So as you folks will remember, those 2 motions were as they read on the screen here. So the first one was that through the CAO, that the UN Safe Cities and Safe Public Spaces program would consider the impact of anti-Asian racism on women's experiences of safety in public spaces and explore ways to identify and collect race-based data about these experiences. The second motion was around provision of information resources to support the safety of women of Asian descent in public spaces in the Halifax region. So in this presentation this afternoon, we'll talk a little bit about what we heard and found out in the current state, what we heard from community, what other municipalities are doing, and what we are doing, and then future considerations. So as you folks know, data is one piece of the puzzle in helping the municipality to understand and respond to safety needs and experiences of a diversity of residents. Currently, we don't collect data in a way that allows us to understand and respond to these issues meaningfully. And although the Women's Advisory Committee, DNI and ANZIO, and the Safe Cities program are making inroads on these issues, the municipality itself doesn't currently have strong relationships with Asian communities across the Halifax Regional Municipality. So these were all things that were considered in the report. As part of preparing the report, we worked with consultant Mo Fung, and Mo helped us to host a session that engaged women and gender nonconforming people of East Asian and Southeast Asian descent to discuss anti-Asian racism and safety in public spaces, and also how folks in the room, folks who are involved, could see this conversation continuing to happen in the future with the municipality. So insights shared in this report, it's in the appendix of the main report, Mo's full report, lay a foundation for future collaboration to address these issues alongside residents of Asian descent. So the potential resources, as part of the report, we did a jurisdictional scan of what other municipalities and organizations are doing across the country. And there's also some highlighted projects from the United States as well. A lot of the initiatives that we found fall under these broader categories. So public art installations, that was a really key piece that we saw other jurisdictions taking on to tackle these issues. Public education campaigns that addressed a variety of issues such as demonstrating and showcasing a variety and diversity of Asian women and gender diverse folks, their experiences and their hopes, and speaking to issues that they've experienced. Bylaw changes to address street harassment, and development of community reporting platforms for instances of racism and harassment. So what we found is that for an HRM specific response, responding here in our context, to meaningfully implement any of these resources or examples of these resources, we as a municipality need to build stronger relationships with women and non-binary residents from diverse Asian communities in HRM. We must work in close collaboration with Asian communities to implement the resources. And addressing issues of safety and racism alongside communities who have been marginalized and continue to be marginalized requires resources to build and sustain trust and collaboration. And currently, we don't have those resources in place. So part of the report too, we outlined what we are currently doing. So as part of the Safe City program, we'll be moving forward to develop a community-led process to develop resources to support the safety of Asian women, non-binary, and gender diverse people in public spaces. And we can talk a little bit about like what that might look like in the discussion piece. The Safe City program will continue to work with transit to integrate messaging to address anti-Asian racism and hate into future anti-discrimination transit code campaign. And DNI is working and will continue to work to develop a multilingual policy for municipal communications and materials. This last piece here came forward as an important point that in whatever resources that we're developing, it's important that we consider who the folks are that will be taking in those resources and using those resources. And for folks who don't speak English as their first language and speak one of the diversity of Asian languages that exists in HRM as their first language, it needs to be accessible and relevant to those folks who are speaking those different languages as well. The Safe Cities program will also continue to work with business units to explore ways to incorporate voluntary data initiatives regarding women and gender diverse people's experiences in public spaces. One of the sort of key possibilities that came forward with transit, working alongside transit, working with Parks and Rec and libraries. And the Women and Gender Equity Strategy, which you folks have had an opportunity to contribute to and will continue to have an opportunity to contribute to, will provide another set of data from conversations with communities across HRM and will identify priorities for action. So as you folks can imagine, when I was writing this report and when I was working with the team to write this report, we were scanning across the municipality to look at different ways that we're currently collecting data. And as you folks know, the municipality is a large organization with many different business units and departments. And so some of the work sort of fell quite naturally within the realm of the Safe City program, while other pieces of the work would be really spread across the organization and sort of fall in the jurisdiction of different departments. And so these pieces here, these are some key municipal data collection processes that we found in the report that if they are enhanced and resourced, could be sources of robust disaggregated race, gender, and other equity-based data. So that would be the resident survey, reports of violence, harassment, and safety concerns made through 311, and the upcoming 20-year community vision. So as I mentioned to you folks, that was a very brief overview of the report. As Jane mentioned in her email, it is quite long, but if there's anything else that I haven't included in this report, please feel free to ask about it and we can dive into it together.
Well, thanks very much, Amy. I mean, it's pretty, I think it's very exciting actually for our committee to be able to hear this report, because it emerged as a result of a motion that was made at a meeting back in June of 2021. And so here we are now, actually seeing some of the results of our hard work. But now it's your turn to ask questions or make comments. And Haneen, we're going to start with you and go through alphabetically by last name.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much, Amy, for the presentation and the report. It's wonderful. I think exactly like you said, Jane, to see that something that we brought forward and that Christine brought forward is actually coming to fruition. I don't really have any questions right now. I just wanted to say thank you, and I'm excited to just sort of percolate and think about what we can do now and hopefully bring forward a new motion to act on it.
Lisa, over to you.
Thank you very much. And thanks, Amy, for the presentation. This is my second time seeing it, and I've been able to sort of have a moment to think about the information in it, and just wondering if perhaps, and this might be a question for Tracy as well, if it might be worth pursuing in the future. I know it's not going to happen this budget cycle for sure, but wondering if perhaps having an Asian Affairs representative in diversity in the D&I office might be a goal that we try to pursue for the coming years. And I'm not sure if it's sort of a chicken and egg thing. Should we build stronger relationships with our Asian communities first and then go for an Asian Affairs representative with D&I, or should we do the representative first and then use that person to help build stronger relationships? I just think this is it's a missed opportunity, because especially with our universities, we have so many students of Asian descent that are coming to Halifax, and we're trying to convince a lot of these young people to stay in Halifax. So throwing a few ideas out there and just wondering what you thought.
Tracy, go ahead, and perhaps you'd like to respond.
Can everybody hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Through you, Madam Chair, to the counselor. Counselor, this is going to be a really tough budget year.
Oh yes, I know it's not going to happen this budget year, but it might be a goal, an aspirational goal for the next few years. Yeah.
Exactly. So what our team has done is we've actually written a strategic plan just for our office, which is kind of guiding us and identifying those gaps that we need to fill. So for example, we don't have a 2S LGBTQ plus advisor. We don't have an advisor for policy. We don't have an advisor to reach out to our Asian community. But what we do have that may be of assistance to us in the next while as we continue to build that is we've just hired a new immigrant services advisor. And so they just started 1 month ago. So that is one opening to move this work forward. So along with Amy B's work and our new immigrant services strategy, I think we're moving in the right direction. But yes, as we go along with the team and we look at what the community feels we need to have, these are pieces that we need to think about building into our budget plans moving forward.
No, awesome. No, good news. Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Okay, thank you. Jackie, any comments or questions?
I guess it's the chicken and the egg bit, and I hear you when you say there's willingness but no money in the budget. And I just came from my office where I'm putting in my 3-year budget, and I have to say we started out with 3 items, and now what's being submitted has 7 items, recognizing that not all 7 of them will get funded because of fiscal issues, but putting them on a piece of paper and people having to read them somehow is a gentle reminder of the fact that this is a priority and that it shouldn't slip off their to-do list for subsequent years. So I hear what Tracy and others are saying about, this is not the right year to ask, but I feel like if it's on there with an explanation about what are the relative merits of considering this type of position versus not having this type of position, I think that will help people start to percolate around why this is necessary. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jackie. And Hannah.
I thought that presentation was great, and I'm very excited that we're able to continue this process. I look forward to what comes from this. No questions from me, though.
Okay. My apologies, Maggie, I skipped over you. So Maggie, it's your turn.
No worries.
I think we're having a little technical trouble there. Can't hear you, Maggie.
So Maggie, if you're in the meeting, we can't hear you. So you might want to try disconnecting the meeting and rejoining the Zoom meeting and see if that improves your connection.
I'll leave. Okay.
Oh,
Thanks. Are
okay,
you
thank
back?
you.
Are you back, Maggie? No.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that. There's a little bit of technical difficulties there. So I was just saying, thank you, Amy, for this presentation. And I just had one question. Could you elaborate on the bylaw changes to the street harassment and what that means?
Yeah, for sure, Maggie. So that was one of the responses that we saw happening in multiple jurisdictions when we looked at the jurisdictional scan. So it looks different in every jurisdiction depending on what is included in those bylaws. But I would say that this is actually a movement that's happening more broadly around issues of street harassment that impact folks of all races and all genders, but that there were specific responses around anti-Asian racism as well. So some jurisdictions have put in place bylaws that allow folks, because we know that hate and harassment are not always, depending on both the situation in terms of how people feel comfortable reporting, or the instance in terms of having to quote unquote prove that the instance was an instance of harassment or hate, that those instances do not always go through sort of the criminal justice system, and folks can be left feeling as though there's no real sort of reprieve or response to an instance of hate or harassment. And so some jurisdictions have developed bylaws that would discourage street harassment. So would put in place a penalty, I guess, against that behavior in public spaces, on the streets, in public places. So it really depends on the jurisdiction in terms of what that looks like specifically, but more broadly, it would be sort of another avenue for addressing street harassment. I'm not sure if that answers your question, Maggie.
Yeah, you did. Yeah, thank you.
Good. Thanks. Liz, it's your turn.
First of all, thank you, Amy, for this presentation. I really enjoyed reading the report. I thought it was really clear and detailed in terms of the next needed steps. And I do look forward to seeing where it's going. And just great to hear the engagement from the community with this process. I was seeing, the session was full. There was a wait list to attend. No questions for me at this time, but just congratulations on the work done so far.
Thanks, Liz. And Christine.
Thank you, and big thank you to Amy and also to the committee for supporting when I put a motion like last year, and I'm happy to see this follow up. And I'm just wondering, Amy, what would be your suggestion? Like, what can we do through the WASH committee to put some motions forward, and then to help the city to have some actions?
Yeah, thank you so much, Christine. I'll answer that question. And I think I also wanted to respond to Jackie's comment around the resourcing piece, because this, as you folks probably saw, this was quite a complex report in that it addressed two issues, race and gender-based data and resources to support the safety of Asian women and gender diverse folks. Those are quite intertwined issues, but they really could be separate reports warranting their own process and depth and research. And so I have a different response, I guess, to different parts of the report. In terms of there not being currently resources in place, one of the pieces, I think, and that's a bit of like a broad comment on some of the possibilities that we could move forward with. As I mentioned, you know, there are efforts underway, such as the resident survey, and the team who creates the resident survey works closely with the D&I team to be reaching out to different communities within HRM. I think, as we found in the report, and as folks would know, you know, through your own work, that to ensure to have good data that's able to be disaggregated well and meaningfully for all the different intersections of identities that we experience as humans, it requires being able to reach out to many, many different people so that we have enough people to draw from in that survey data to then be able to disaggregate. And that kind of data collection and disaggregation takes dedicated resources. And so while HRM staff are working to ensure that the data that we collect represents a diversity of folks, that's where I say the piece around we just don't have the resources allocated at this moment to do that in a way that's meaningful. So I think that could be a real area of potential for us as a municipality, because we have this quite robust method of collecting data that asks questions about many different experiences that residents are experiencing, both in public spaces and accessing services that are provided by the municipality. So I would say that could be an area of further exploration. And for future looking as well. So, you know, as we're taking on, there are many folks in the organization that are doing really interesting work around data collection. And so as we're looking future, making sure that we're considering race and gender and the other intersections of identity when we're looking at data collection. So again, that would take dedicated resources to both be reaching out to communities to get communities involved in data collection, but also looking at how the data is used and mobilized and rolled out. So to encapsulate that, I guess, Christine, I think the data pieces, there's a lot that could be further explored. And it was difficult to do that in a robust way and in a report that kind of scanned all the different pieces of data. So you really could look at each of those data pieces in a more like concentrated way. And then on, this is a bit of an assumption I'm making, but in terms of moving forward and engaging with folks to create those resources, I do think that once we start having more conversations to actually build out some information resources to support the safety of Asian women and gender diverse folks, some of those I think we'll be able to resource through our own work and from working across business units, but we may find in those discussions that there are further gaps that are not currently resourced. And so that may be a discussion that, you know, as that work continues, our team could come back to the Women's Advisory Committee with some of those findings and have a conversation about that.
Thank you. If I may, Amy, I participated actually early this year on the consultation with women and also gender diverse group of on the anti-Asian racism issue. And one thing we find is the people who attend the event, most of us, we speak English and our age around like a 20 or 30, this kind of age group. And in the future, we really want to see if we can have more resources to reach to, for example, elder in our Asian community, and even have like translation service, because many immigrants or many other people who grow out here, but immigrants, they may speak like a perfect English, and like how can we reach to the different kind of generation group, and their experience will be very different. And one idea we have from the discussion is that it's very soon, but it sounds like far away. In May, it's Asian Heritage Month. We have 6 months to prepare. Like, how can we do something for May and to plan now, like Asian community engagement and to hear what kind of resources need from the community. So that's my suggestion. Thanks.
Thanks. Okay, so Amy, I just really appreciate your report and your presentation today. But when I was reading the material, I was really interested in the fact that our motion and the Executive Standing Committee's motion were very narrow. They dealt with the Asian women. And then the report came, and I saw that you had expanded to non-binary and gender diverse people, which I'm delighted you did. That seems to me a really good move. But then it caused me to wonder, when I read the police information, the racism activities in the city basically were 3-to-1 against African American or African Black people in the HRM. So way more racist incidents were happening against Black people than against Asians. So that made me wonder, is there a way that we could expand those resources to also address the concerns of the Black community, or are they already there and they don't need to be done? I'm just curious about that. Tracy, I see you want to jump in here. So.
Through you, Madam Chair, to you. Amy, do you mind if I jump in? Okay, so there's 2 pieces to this. One piece that I think we recognize as part of our work is anti-Asian discrimination against our Asian community is underreported. Okay, so that is a huge piece, which is why the data looks that way. As far as how we are addressing what's happening in the African Nova Scotian community, it's embedded in a lot of our work, but we also have a specific division in our office that specifically looks at what's happening with the African Nova Scotian community. We have an anti-Black racism coordinator that works with various parts of the organization. But I think in this particular report, why it was the way that it was is because that's what Watch asked for. But what we learned from the report is part of how we move forward. So we wouldn't just narrowly only do what we do for Asian and non-binary women. Yeah. We would look at this through a broader lens. Yeah. But I do think what's really important to understand is the underreporting of harm that's happening to our Asian community here in this municipality. The other piece of that is that this harm and this underreporting has been going on for years. And this is one of the first and few reports that I think has ever come to the municipality to acknowledge that we need to address what's happening with our Asian and non-binary communities. So it's a real bonus for us in D&I working with public safety to have that information, but we'll also use it as part of our other work. Yeah. So this report it's groundbreaking, really, because we've not talked about anti-Asian hate in the municipality. We've talked about anti-Black racism. We've talked about gender equity. Not to say that those pieces aren't as valuable, but we haven't talked hardly at all in my years since being here about anti-Asian racism. And I think that's why this report is so groundbreaking.
Yeah, it is. It is. The other thing I just when you're thinking, I'm thinking of that, and all the issues of, hate crimes. 3 of them were religious. 3 of the ones that were reported, and Haneen alerted, and focused our thinking on anti-Muslim activities. So I'm just hopeful that as the resources are developed, that they can, they can be piggybacked on each other and be useful for these diverse communities that we represent. Amy, now I'm sorry, you wanted to speak.
Yeah, and this is really just building off of what Tracy shared, but in terms of your question, Jane, around the use of women and non-binary folks, that's a practice that in the work that I do in the Safe Cities program, the research that we've done in the original scoping study, and we see it across, stories that are being shared across the country and our own community, that while the experience of women and non-binary folks is not exactly the same, because of course everyone's experiences differs based on those many different intersections of identity, that there are, when we're looking at who is most impacted by violence in public spaces, women and non-binary and trans folks are disproportionately impacted by violence in public spaces. And so that's why in the work that we do, we use the language of, we're looking at gender more broadly and sort of those systems of oppression. And so looking at the impact of these systems on women and non-binary folks. So it's language that we consistently use, I guess. And I don't know if Bailey would have anything to add to that, but just wanted to make that additional comment there.
Thank you. Christine's waiting to get in here, I think.
Thank you. I just want to echo earlier what Tracy mentioned, that definitely there's lots issue happening to different races, and especially for the anti-Asian races, and less the data is underreported, and also many of time there's many immigrants or many newcomers, they don't know where to ask for help, or they don't feel comfortable to report the information to the police. So I don't think the police have all the data from the police office represent the full picture, and that's why we bring forward this motion and to ask for a better data collection, and look forward to see the future for this issue.
Any other comments? Anybody else wants to get in before we move on to the next agenda item? Well, thank you very much, Amy. Really appreciate this. And like I said, I feel pretty proud of the fact that, we have a member who brought a motion forward. The committee responds to that. The executive standing committee's response to that. And we have a report, and I can only see good things coming out of this for our people in our city. So that's good news as far as I'm concerned. And all of us need to be continuing to think about how do we take this to the next step. And Amy, we'll look forward to any guidance that you might provide for us on that. So thank you. Oh, Lisa.
No, I just wanted, before Amy takes off, just wanted to thank her for attending executive committee and presenting there. And just wanted to mention that after the meeting was over, I had a member from council approach me and said they have never seen a committee of council so God, I forget how she put it now, but anyway, the gist of it was that can't believe how focused and how driven this committee is, and how productive we have been as a committee. And so they just took that opportunity to mention that to me. So I just wanted to bring it forward to the group. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. Perfect lead in to our next discussion, because I'm convinced that a group of people becomes effective and active when they set some priorities. And so that's why we're going to have a discussion here about what you think are the priorities for the Women's Advisory Committee for the next year. Just to kind of frame it again, reminding you to kind of, if you can, when you think about these priorities, Tracy reminded us last meeting that the more connected our priorities are to those of the broader HRM, the greater likelihood of us. So Tracy's indicating she's leaving. We'll miss you, Tracy, but thank you for being here and your input on the last item. And Bailey's still with us, so that's great. So keeping in mind the strategic plan, the priorities there, and also keeping in mind that our work plan priorities have been what we use to inform ourselves about various issues. It doesn't mean that's what we're limited to. If there's issues that come up, as you may have recognized already, there's issues that come up that seem important, then we deal with those. But in the meantime, we need some priorities to help us. So we're going to do this alphabetically, and Lisa, you get to kick off here, and I'm going to try to listen and take notes. So here you go. Top three
Okay.
priorities.
Okay, so in my top three were, I think we really need to continue our work with surrounding housing and homelessness. That problem is not going away anytime soon, and I think we definitely need to continue down the path with the work that we've been doing. I think the review of HRM services using a gender-based analysis lens is one of those things that's going to be ongoing. That's not the scope of that work is not something that's going to take a year. That's a multi-year process, I do believe. And the other thing that I had was something new, and it sort of, came to me during discussions about labor shortages, and just wondering, looking at women in non-traditional roles and steps the municipality can take to attract staff to these roles, and what needs to be done to ensure, a safe and healthy workplace for women in non-traditional roles. So those were the three things that I came up with. Thank you.
Yeah, great. So just to kind of get what you're saying about women in non-traditional roles, kind of what can the HRM do to ensure that women who do try to, that are encouraged to do it and then stay safe when they get there? Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. Yes. Encourage them to take on these roles. Why are they not attractive to women, these non-traditional roles? What can we do to make them more attractive for women? And then, once women are in those roles, what do they need to be supported?
Okay, good. Thank you. Jackie.
Sorry, just a second. So Lisa has stole my thunder. So I want to just
you can
echo.
agree.
Well, I do agree. So housing and homelessness was top. Gender-based analysis for reviewing HRM policies and programs. And then the third one I had was women in politics. So how do we actually understand, women's place in politics, and how do we encourage women, identified individuals, to get more involved in politics? Because will speak to both item 2, GBA plus of existing policies and programs from HRM, as well as housing and homelessness as it affects women, girls, and other gender diverse populations. So that's it from me. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. So no harm in repeating the priorities if they're the same as somebody else, because that'll give us a sense of, communally what we think is the most important thing. Maggie, what about you? I'm in trouble here. Can't hear.
Maggie, if you turn off your video, it might help with the strength of your audio connection.
Darn.
And can we suggest that Maggie types it into the chat, maybe?
Yeah, good idea, Jackie. Thank you.
And I'm
Maggie?
also going to suggest that Maggie perhaps leave the Zoom and rejoin it and see if that helps with her connection as well. So, Madam Chair, Maggie has entered a couple of items into the chat. If you would like to read them out.
Thank you. Thank you for reminding me. I'm seeing them. Maggie's saying women's work-life balance and women's mental health. So sort of health issues, specifically mental health and work-life balance, which is kind of a health issue as well. She may have gone offline. Oh, I see she's still there. Anything else? Oh, women's physical health, more involvement and activities. So physical health. So for Maggie, health is a priority. Women's health is a priority. And she's going to try to rejoin. I'm going to move on, and if we can, we'll go back to Maggie and see if we can let her say in her own words what she thinks is important. Hannah.
Yeah, my top 3 would be women's mental health and safety, specifically concerning the sex trafficking we have in Halifax and the lack of supports in there.
Okay.
My second is women in the workplace. And my third is housing.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Hannah. And you want to say anything more about any of those? You're all good?
I think I am all good with those. They are
Okay.
very important to me,
Okay.
and I'm sure others can agree why they're important.
Yeah, I sure can. All right, Liz.
So for me, the first one is kind of that work-life balance aspect of things, and that includes access to supports that make that possible. So discussions around childcare, discussions around flexible workplaces, around transparency from employers. The second one would be continuing really that review of current programs through that gender-based analysis point of view. And the third one would be kind of focusing on housing as well, to echo that.
Okay. And thank you. And Christine, what's yours?
So for me, the keyword is called representation. So first one, I'm thinking about Halifax. I think last year introduced Halifax Inclusive Economic Growth Strategy. And I'm thinking about women's participation in Halifax's economic growth. So that's one. And second one is similar to Jacket, women's participation or understanding of politics, especially we have the municipal election coming out in 2024. So how can we utilize next year to encourage more women to be interested in the municipal election and politics? Third part is very relevant to us. It's about women's participation in the agency boards and committee. How can we encourage more women to participate in the HRM's ABC? So these three are my suggestions.
Okay, thank you, Christine. Maggie, are you back with us? No, I don't think so. Haneen, have you had a chance yet? No.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think what we spoke about last time during the previous meeting, I think it is housing again. I'm reiterating what everybody else has said, as well as potentially going back to human trafficking, because I don't feel like we've done any we haven't brought anything forward regarding that I can recall right now. And we did talk a little bit about policing as well, just sort of whatever we can do in terms of if there's anything that we can do with the Police Commissioners Board, and as well focusing on representation, specific focus on Indigenous women.
Yeah, and Indigenous, okay. And we still don't have Maggie back, I don't think. Do we, Andrea?
Madam Chair, she's in the process of rejoining. I'm trying to promote her.
Okay, good.
So she might be in momentarily.
Okay, so any questions or comments for each other? Anything that anybody has said?
Just a quick reflection to whomever, sorry, I can't exactly who mentioned the women in municipal politics. There's actually a Francophone municipal campaign school that is going to be starting in January. Interestingly enough, that's going to be led at a municipal level by one of the Francophone organizations within the province. And so it's kind of one of those initiatives that might be slotting well into the work we're doing. And Status of Women Nova Scotia also has an English version of that that's available on their website that's really kind of complete with videos and all such kinds of things. So it's great to see that the work that we're doing is aligning with some of the other work that's being done around the province as well.
Sure. Lisa, did you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on that and mention the status of women in campaign school. But certainly we don't have to defer to them. I mean, certainly we can work with them, and thinking that perhaps in the new year, spring or fall of next year, maybe look at hosting a session on political involvement for women, and invite folks from the campaign school to speak. It'd be a great opportunity to not only get information about the campaign school for women, but also, our clerk's office could be involved with just talking about how to get involved with boards and other committees, and just tap into what are the barriers keeping women from getting to these tables. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So what I hear you saying, Lisa, is kind of like thinking of maybe doing an event that would involve multiple stakeholders and us and other women. Is that? Are you thinking
certainly.
of that?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Looking ahead to the municipal election in 24.
Yeah.
I mean, this is 23 is when decisions will be made, I think,
Sure.
when it comes to whether or not to run for public office. So yeah.
Bailey, I think you wanted to get in here.
Yeah, I believe through the same grant as the other campaign school, HRM has also recently received a grant for a campaign school that is focusing on Indigenous women and gender diverse people that we are currently in the progress of working on with our various community partners, such as the Circle of Hope and the Native Women's Association and a few others. So that is currently in the works within Halifax, as well with the Office of Diversity and Inclusion and our partners.
Okay. Maggie, I see you're back. Do you want to try to talk so we can hear your ideas from your voice?
Yes. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Perfect. Sorry about that. Okay, so I guess the 3 points I brought up are kind of intertwined in a way, because when you have work-life balance, you'll feel better. So you're mentally healthy, and then a lot of the illness or so get better or get better soon. My point, I guess, also for me is how could you maintain a work-life balance, because I have to work and work very hard, so juggle many other things in life and many other aspects. So the other part is mental health, because it's very important, so that we can be mentally strong. How could we support the community, especially what kind of programs can we, and then lastly, the physical health. So, how do we encourage more activities, healthy activities, go to the gym, running, or in a safe way, because women are afraid of going around there, and especially now it gets dark at 4 p.m. So go up, run. So how do we do something around to make women feel more healthy, at the same time feeling safe to go kind of activities?
So you're still broken up quite a bit, but I think I got a bit of the gist of what you said, because you'd already given us the points. So thank you for that. So it looks to me, just very roughly, I'll have another look at this, but it looks to me like housing remains a very important issue for us. Women's involvement in politics is and in boards and committees continues to be an important one, and women's health also is, and safety. I think health and safety and program, like when you think about, I think Maggie was talking about women's being able to be involved in physical activity and feel safe in our communities. And Lisa talked about non-traditional and women feeling safe in those environments. So, I mean, kind of the broad issue of safety for women fits under women's health. So what I think we'll do with this, with your ideas, is I'll put them together and in a draft work plan kind of thing, and I'd ask you then to review it and make sure that it reflects what you think we've said today. And if it does, if it doesn't, then let me know so we can adjust it. but that it should be fairly, I think, fairly straightforward to come up with some specific things that we can work on. Give us some good guidance for things we can work on in the next year. And just like to mention again that these are kind of the issues that we will work to inform ourselves about, and maybe as Lisa was suggesting, an event that would help inform other women about how to become involved in politics and so on. But keep in mind that when things cross your plate, like they did for Haneen on a recent bylaw change, you get that's important to bring that forward to the committee. Any other comments or questions? We're good on that. Well, we're such a sharp group of people that did all their homework, and we're ready to roll. So I think at this point we are ready to hear from Councillor Blackburn. She's going to give us an update on what's going on in council, and following that we're going to hear from Jackie, who'll give us a presentation on World AIDS Day. So over to you.
All right, lovely. Thank you very much. So since the last Women's Advisory Committee meeting, Regional Council has met twice and the Budget Committee has met once. We're now into the glorious budget season. Council, so the first meeting was November the 8th. That was a meeting of council, and we had a presentation from the Provincial Housing Minister, John Lohr. He was invited to council to discuss the housing crisis and his government's plans for emergency housing this winter for the increasing homelessness issue. He also spoke about the need for Bill 225, which now gives the province power to override any HRM bylaw that the province feels is standing in the way of housing development. We voted to approve the budget process and gave staff direction to prepare their budget plans. Council agreed to a new facility operating agreement for the Centennial Arena. That's something that we do on a fairly regular basis with our rec centers and arenas. Many of them, although they are owned by HRM, they're run by volunteer boards. And so we like to have an official agreement in place with those boards. We approved the appointment of 4 new building officials. Those would be our new building inspectors for HRM. There was a discussion and various appointments of councillors to boards and committees for the next 2 years. And I will note that Councillor Stoddart and I will be returning to this committee for the next 2 years. So this is a process that we go through every 2 years to either update or refresh the members of council that serve on these committees. So it is a bit of a process, but we undertake it every 2 years. We also approved a new active transportation plan for North Dartmouth, and we asked for an update on negotiations with the province for the new service exchange agreement. So HRM and the province has a number of areas where we share services. A good example is plowing of roads. We have a number of roads in HRM that are owned by the province, but maintained by HRM, and we have an agreement that sets out how that work should take place. So those agreements are being renegotiated and updated right now, and we just asked for staff to update us on their progress on that. At the November 22nd meeting, Councillor Sam Austin was voted in as Deputy Mayor for the next year. Again, it's a 1-year term, and Sam takes over from Councillor Pam Lovelace, who has served as Deputy Mayor for the last year. There was discussion about the construction work on the new Broad Street North roundabout, and we voted not to shut down that route during construction. It does come at a bit of a cost, but it was felt that not shutting it down completely was the route to go. We felt that shutting it down would just create absolute traffic nightmares. So we had that discussion. We had a heritage hearing to give heritage status to the old church at 1102 Purcell's Cove Road. Passed a motion to expand the Student Transit Pass pilot program to cover more schools, including a number of junior high schools. Right now, we do have a Student Transit Pass program that goes through it started with our universities, actually. And university students, as part of their student fees, they would pay and get transit passes for the term. There was a need that we saw a need for that at the high school level. So we established a pilot project to have high schools involved with this. It works so well. We've now expanded it, and some junior highs have been approved for this as well. We approved also the establishment of a sobering center pilot project. So this will mean now that HRM will have a medically supervised location for people arrested for public intoxication. This basically will take the place of the police drunk tank. And, you know, we saw this as a major step forward, because a lot of people who end up in the drunk tank really, you know, they don't belong there. They have committed no crime other than just being intoxicated in public. And as we have tragically learned in the past, you know, not having these people in the tank supervised at all times has proven tragic. And so we're giving this pilot project a whirl with a sobering center that means that people who are arrested will go to a sobering center and be monitored by nurses or nurse practitioners who will just make sure that they sleep it off and sleep it off safely. Let's see. Policy surrounding community gardens was approved. So that gives community groups better direction on how to establish and operate community gardens. Got a progress report on Halifax, our green plan. Also, a request was made for staff to develop a strategy with Halifax Partnership to attract, house, and retain skilled talent to address the labor shortages. And we're going to focus on skilled tradespeople and laborers that are needed by the construction industry for housing construction. November 22nd also marked the final council meeting for CAO Jacques Dubé. So after 6 years with HRM, Jacques is retiring, and the process to hire a new CAO is just about finished, and the successful candidate will be announced likely in the next couple of weeks. I will say that it will be an historic announcement in keeping with the gender parity council we now have. And I don't think I'm giving away anything by saying that. And finally, the budget committee met on Friday for the first of what will be many meetings starting in January. Friday's meeting was just basically to give staff direction to return to us in the new year with a budget reflecting a 4% average tax bill increase. Staff originally suggested an 8% increase, but that was voted down in favor of a 4%. And that, Madam Chair, is the report from the last two council meetings. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Lisa.
Open for any questions if there are any, by the way, sorry.
Yeah, well, that's thank you for your reports. Always very informative and very succinct. That was so great. Any questions for Lisa? It's all good. So I'm just going to request actually for Jackie's about to do her presentation. I think I have a preference that people put their cameras on so Jackie can maybe see you when she's if she's speaking. Just helps to see her face. So Jackie, over to you.
Now, I understand that somebody at that side of the virtual world is going to forward my slides. Is that correct, or am I mistaken?
Yes,
Oh.
Jackie, I'm just about to start sharing them.
Okay, thanks, Andrea. Appreciate that.
Andrea sets them up for you.
Great.
Yeah. Thanks for turning on your cameras, folks. That's appreciated.
Great. Thanks very much, Andrea. Okay, so thank you to the members of the committee for inviting me to speak today very briefly about World AIDS Day. I've worked in the field for 30 years. I think it's really important that we acknowledge both the successes of the HIV movement, largely driven by community efforts to address HIV infections globally. The reality is the theme rather for World AIDS Day 2022 is Equalize. And I just wanted to remind everybody that although Equalize is kind of an aspirational direction for HIV prevention, not just in Canada, but around the world, there are numerous gender-based challenges to HIV prevention. So I'm going to go through my slides, and if at any point people want to stop me, just chime in or raise your hand. This is not meant to be a formal presentation. It's just meant to be kind of an acknowledgement of where we're at around the world in terms of reducing gender-based disparities in HIV and AIDS. So next slide, please. So as you just heard, that the theme for World AIDS Day 2022 is equalize. And so what we're going to do is kind of pick apart this notion of equalize with a gender-based lens. Next slide, please. So here's some regional HIV and AIDS data, and these are the most recent data available from UNAIDS. And you can see the breakdown. Globally, we're still looking at 38.4 million people, adults and children living with HIV, which is a substantial burden on communities, on individuals, and on healthcare systems. So it hasn't by any stretch dissipated, despite the fact that we have better treatments for HIV infection. And the equalize is important to keep in mind as we walk through these slides, because you'll see the disparities that still exist and the sort of examples of particular populations, including women, are continuing to be hard hit. Next slide, please. Again, if you break down the data by particular populations around the world, you're going to see sort of the traditional breakdown that is an artifact from the early days of HIV surveillance. And so you'll see the breakdown here in this slide: sex workers, people who inject drugs, gay men and other MSM, transgender women, clients of sex workers and sex partners of key populations, and then remaining populations. So you can see it's not a perfect science, but you get the sense globally what the breakdown is by so-called target populations. Next slide, please. Now, why the equalize is important is that we see increasing availability of services for HIV prevention treatment. And this is called the cascade of care. So from the point that an individual finds out that they're HIV positive through to their linkages to care following a positive diagnosis, we know that there are still many challenges in terms of equal access to both prevention as well as treatment and related psychosocial supports for people once they test positive. So we know that laws, policies, and practices that have been put in place since the start of the pandemic to address stigma are still being felt in the Canadian context and elsewhere in the world, which is to say the stigma that still centers around HIV means that individuals who have the opportunity to get tested may not avail themselves of that test for fear of what it might mean for them as an individual or within their respective communities. So we also know that technology and equal access to HIV treatments differs between the global South and the global North. And again, this speaks to the disparities that we see in terms of the way forward with this pandemic. And communities that are able to look at these inequalities and develop actions is certainly needed. But again, the disparities will become clearer as we walk through the rest of these slides. Next slide, please. It's also important to ground this conversation about equalize in the Sustainable Development Goals. And you'll see on this slide, I've put all of the SDGs on the top of this slide so you can get a gentle reminder of what they are. And what's interesting about this is UNAIDS and other organizations that are working at the national or global level to address HIV prevention acknowledge that Goal 5, so it's gender equity, is a significant issue in terms of prevention, treatment, and support, or that cascade. But HIV is still a leading cause of death for women of reproductive age, so those between 15 and 44 years of age. And also that women who are living with HIV face an increased level of violence, often from families and intimate partners. And so again, stigma and discrimination against women living with HIV, those who use drugs, also creates variable access to treatments and that cascade of care. And so what we really need, and this is something that the UNAIDS argues, is we need gender transformative HIV programs and policies that also engage men to reduce violence against women and to empower women from a rights-based perspective. Next slide.
Sorry, Jackie, could I just ask UNA to just, what is that?
It's a United Nations program on AIDS. So it's
Okay.
a part of the UN system. Yeah.
Okay, so I thought it had.
Okay. Next slide, please. And just to unpack the gender-based violence piece again, and this is another example of what the international community is doing to fight gender-based violence, particularly in relation to HIV transmission. The four key forms of violence are obviously physical violence, sexual violence, emotional and psychological violence, as well as socioeconomic violence, which is huge in instances where women don't have the capacity to own property or vote or hold down jobs that would allow them to have some socioeconomic advantage. So we know that gender-based violence continues to be a global epidemic, and that 1 in 3 women worldwide will throughout their life experience physical and or sexual violence from an intimate partner. And in some instances, this can cost her life. And we know that studies indicate that in some regions, women who've experienced physical or sexual violence are 1.5 times more likely to acquire HIV infection. So clearly, gender-based violence is an indicator for greater likelihood of HIV transmission. And we also know that among women living with HIV, intimate partner violence can lead to lower antiretroviral therapy use, which is a treatment that's used to prevent the progression of HIV infection. And they also have higher viral loads. So I will just tell you that my PhD, just very briefly, my PhD dissertation was looking at adherence to antiretroviral therapy among HIV positive women in Canada. And what we found was women who couldn't be out about their HIV status for fear of violence from their immediate family or their intimate partner meant that they were less likely to adhere to their drug regimen, in part because back in the day, the drug regimen could be up to 40 pills a day. In some instances, medications needed to be refrigerated and or medications needed to be taken with particular types of food or beverages. So this really created the perfect storm for, on the one hand, yes, there are antiretroviral treatments available in theory, but in practice for women, this meant making a choice between taking your medication as prescribed. So you need to have 95% or better clinical adherence to your drug regimen in order to get the clinical benefit, which is basically viral suppression. Next slide, please. So interestingly, the United Nations UNAIDS program has previously put together a campaign that was looking to end HIV and AIDS by 2025. Now they have not missed the target. Not UNAIDS has missed the target, but globally we have all missed the target. So not unlike political decision making globally, and Canada has signed on to the UN declarations, both the previous UN declaration that said that by 2025 we'll have ended the pandemic. And now we've seen that UNAIDS has had to revise their political declaration to call on countries to provide effective HIV combination prevention options, which is essentially antiretroviral therapy, to 95% of people at risk of acquiring HIV. So now not only is HIV antiretroviral therapy used to prevent the progression of the disease, it can also be used as a pre-exposure prophylaxis. Number two, to get 95% of those living with HIV aware of their status, and to get 95% of those who know their status on HIV treatment to reduce viral load, which will also reduce onward likelihood of onward infection. And then third, that 95% of people on treatment are virally suppressed. So to my earlier point, gender-based violence and stigma associated with disclosing an HIV diagnosis for women can lead to instances where it is not possible for them to be completely adherent or to the 95% clinical requirement for adherence. And so if the global community works together to reach this target, 3.6 million new HIV infections and 1.7 million AIDS-related deaths will be prevented by 2030. So that's the ambition of the UNAIDS declaration, which, as I said, Canada has signed on to the UNAIDS 95-95-95 declaration. Next slide, please. This is a really kind of interesting example, and I've done a lot of work with the Human Sciences Research Council of South Africa. And so you can see these are cities in South Africa, and the breakdown by type of impact and type of prevention efforts by so-called risk category. And I think what's important to note here is that people living with HIV, but their status, but not on treatment. So in other words, you've had a positive, a confirmatory test for HIV, but you don't have access to treatment, or you choose not to be on treatment for the reasons I've previously described, having to have disclosure with partners, etc. And then the next point under that is people living with HIV, knowing their status, on treatment, but they're not virally suppressed. Again, this is an issue about clinical adherence. And then the third bullet on the slide, people living with HIV, knowing their status and on treatment and virally suppressed. So you can see the difference in the color of these bars indicate the numbers, relatively speaking, the numbers of people living with HIV on treatment and who are virally suppressed. And not surprisingly, there are differences by location and by type of population of women. Next slide, please. Again, this is a cross-sex incidence prevalence ratios by country. It's probably hard for you to see. It's not a really great slide. So maybe we can just briefly note that the dark dots, which I think are easier to see, are the incidence prevalence ratio male to female, and the light dots are incidence prevalence ratio for female to male. And so basically just eyeball the slide, and the dark dots are the males and the light dots are females. You can see there are significant differences between males and females in terms of incidence prevalence ratio by countries in sub-Saharan Africa. Next slide, please. This slide will give you a sense of violence-related interventions in 4 key populations, and the focus of this really is to understand how violence against women and against particular populations, such as men who have sex with men, can really impact on the ability of individuals to get tested, adhere to treatment, and to be virally suppressed across the life course once diagnosed. Next slide, please. This is an interesting paper. It was a meta-synthesis of existing evidence on quality by type of intervention for key populations. So you can sort of see, I'm not sure if you can read that particularly well, the top line, which is sex work. Second one is people who use drugs, and the third box is men who have sex with men. And so you can sort of see where there's strong evidence and some promising evidence. And what's interesting is the lower portion of this slide, the lower third of this slide, is really talking about the fact that we don't have strong evidence necessarily on how to deal with gender-based violence yet. And here we are, 4 decades into this pandemic. Next slide, please. So really, what are the implications of some of the data that I've showed you? And this is, again, talking about the implications for gender-based violence. So in terms of practice, policy, and research, very briefly, and I'm not going to read this all to you, but on the right-hand side of this slide, you can sort of see the practice issue. So interventions to prevent and respond to gender-based violence are rapidly developing for key populations. And the other sort of implications is violence prevention and responses is a high priority for HIV key populations around the world. It's probably not a big surprise to anybody on this call. Skipping down further to policy, a few interventions were identified that address access to justice. So where this is really important is country context where women have variable or limited access to human rights legislation or justice that would actually prevent gender-based violence. And so I think there's some kind of underlying premise about not just equal access to HIV treatment, but also equal access to justice systems to actually prevent gender-based violence. And again, I won't go into the research component. Next slide, please. So we know that violence prevention and response for women involved in sex work, for people who use drugs, and for gay, bi, and other men who have sex with men is an important issue to look at in terms of gender-based violence. There's a variety of peer education examples that are used around the world that actually have been quite supportive and quite well received and well evaluated to address gender-based violence, recognizing the complexity of gender-based violence for key populations that are rooted or should be rooted in a rights-based approach is key, as we saw from the previous slide. And the strongest evidence supporting addressing violence is really around risk reduction. So where there is a precursor or likelihood of violence, there are significant challenges in not only with HIV prevention, but in terms of individuals being willing to be tested and referred to care, treatment, and support. Next slide, please. Just a couple of things, if you are interested in reading, this is a book that we did a few years ago, which is really looking at research, policy, and practice for women and HIV prevention in Canada. And this includes chapters on issues within the prison system in Canada and how that impacts on women's access to harm reduction in the prison system. There's other chapters here on trans women and their relative risk for gender-based violence and what we can do from a gender-based perspective to address these. Next slide, please. Mary Bryson from UBC and I recently edited this book on sex and gender-based analysis in public health. Next slide, please. And there are a number of chapters in here that look specifically at sex and gender-based analysis in public health. So what is it? How is it applied to the art and science of public health? And then how do we actually understand sex and gender-based analysis in population health, in gender transformative approaches, and things such as tobacco control, in terms of work that we've done around women's cancers, tuberculosis. A colleague from South Africa contributed that chapter, and then sexual health promotion that was done with a colleague from Australia. So again, it's sort of applying the principles of sex and gender-based analysis to these various arms or various areas that public health is involved in, and seeing what difference a gender-based approach could, or gender transformative approach could take to addressing these complex health and social issues. Next slide, please. That's it. So that was very quick, speedy, but if you've got questions about any of this, I'm happy to answer questions now, or you can follow up by email. Thanks so much for your time.
Oh, thank you, Jackie. Wow, that was, for me anyways, very enlightening. Thank you. Maggie, if you're there, I think it's your turn to start with questions or comments.
I'm gonna turn off my video that maybe you guys can hear. So first of all, amazing put together, so much today. I'm wondering,
Maybe, Maggie, excuse me, maybe I could ask you just to put your question in chat or comments in chat, because we're really having a hard time hearing what you have to say. Would that be possible, please? So while she's doing that, we'll move on to Hannah. Is Hannah still with us? Yes. Hannah, are you there?
Yes, sorry.
That's okay.
My earbud was dying, so I had to quickly change it. Thank you for the presentation. It was great. I don't have any questions at this time, but it was very informative, and I appreciate the time and effort that went into it.
Great. Thanks, Hannah. Liz.
Thank you, Jackie, for that presentation. The specific points on gender-based violence really touched home for me, because we are within the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. So a lot of those themes are coming up both through my work and just kind of generally all around. And it was that table that you showed with the different strategies and kind of how promising the evidence is around those, I found extremely interesting. I don't have any questions, but just thank you. I learned a lot.
Thanks, Liz. Christine.
I just want to say thank you very much, Jackie, for taking your time and suggesting to do this presentation. And I think going forward, this is very informative. And going forward, like I think it would be nice to hear like a different presentation from this group. If our members have any insight I want to share with our committee.
Thanks, Christine. Haneen has unfortunately left the meeting, so that brings us to Lisa.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much for that presentation. That was spectacular. For those of us of a certain vintage who remember when AIDS was first discovered, it was you know, it was a death sentence. And we, you know, with all of the treatments that are available now, we you know, tend to forget that this virus still takes a lot of lives globally. And you know, when you mentioned throughout the presentation, sex workers, and that sort of brought me back to something that was discussed earlier on when we were setting out our work plan and talking about human trafficking. And I'm wondering if perhaps it might be worthwhile to get a presentation from Halifax Regional Police on sex trafficking in HRM and the work that's being done, and you know, maybe an opportunity to see what they're doing and identify any gaps in programs that may be in place. So that's the only thing that was sort of rattling around in my brain while I heard the presentation. Thank you for that.
Thanks, Lisa. And if I may, I'll read Maggie's comment. She said, "Thank you for the presentation, Jackie. I was wondering how we could help as a committee with this issue in the HRM." And that's exactly what I was thinking too. I was interested. I mean, your research has been broad, and but you may have some particular knowledge or expertise in the HRM that and issues that we should maybe be addressing.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I can use an example from a post hoc gender-based analysis we did of the Nova Scotia Advisory Commission on AIDS provincial strategy. And I think, you know, what we learned from that is there's lots of tools to do gender-based analysis, but really what you ought to do is insert gender-based analysis as a foregrounding principle or a lens as you develop your policies and programs, rather than what we did, which was kind of an ad hoc after the fact, because people were actually asking that question, you know, why didn't you include a gender-based analysis in that policy or program? So we took it upon ourselves to sort of look at what happened with that provincial strategy. So I think, you know, there's lots of training tools out there, and I've done loads of training on GBA, but I do think it's worth reminding people, and maybe that's a memo to counselors, just basically saying, you know, when developing, and I think we talked about this last time we got together, Jane, you know, really, if you are on a 5-year cycle to revise policies, then, you know, at that point, please do bring a gender-based analysis to that policy. So if you didn't do it originally, instituting some sort of a policy on gender-based analysis, which means every time you cycle into a new revision cycle for anything, or if you're developing new policies and those become part of that revision cycle, that you foreground that revision or that crafting through a gender-based analytical framework. Thanks.
Thank you. So it seems to me too that this topic fits well with, you know, those of you who have suggested that women's health is a major priority for you for the coming year. And obviously the impact of gender-based violence on women's health with respect to AIDS in particular. I mean, there are a variety of impacts, but in AIDS in particular, may be something that we should learn more about and take some action on, as also, as Lisa said, the human trafficking issue. So we'll be thinking about how we might address those two issues as we go forward. Any other comments or questions?
Can I respond to Lisa's?
Sure.
So I agree that the human trafficking and sex trafficking piece is really important. And we did a panel presentation on this topic with the McEachern Institute on Public Policy and Governance. And there were former youth in the room who had been sex trafficked. And unfortunately, some of them were very vocal about how they contracted more, you know, one or more sexually transmitted or bloodborne infection, and certainly not by their choice, but because they found themselves in the situation where they had limited sexual and reproductive autonomy. So I do think it's important to maybe invite folks from the police services or from wherever to actually talk about what they're doing with this, because I think, as we pointed out at the last meeting, Nova Scotia has one of the highest rates, if not the highest rate, of sex trafficking of young people in Canada. So I think there is definitely something there that fits across many of the themes or issues that were brought up today in terms of the brainstorming session. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Any other comments anybody would like to make? Well, then we will basically conclude the meeting. And but before we call it to a close, we will just remind you that now we've approved the meeting schedule. Our next meeting is January 12th. So that'll be the new year. Hard to believe that we will be in a new year, January 12th. And I have to make an announcement to you, and that is, as set out in section 125 bracket 3 of the Administrative Order 1, respecting the procedures of the council, the seat held by Kim McDonald on the Women's Advisory Committee is now vacant, as they are deemed to have resigned from the Women's Advisory Committee for missing 3 consecutive meetings. So there's a vacancy on our committee now, and the people that do all the hard work, the legwork to find committee members will be seeking another person so that we have a full complement.
Yeah, that if I could just add, that probably won't take long, because when we go through the process, we usually have alternates that we have already
Great.
pre-screened. So I
Good.
think Andrea can probably confirm that, but usually that is the process. So fingers crossed, we've got somebody that we can get in place fairly soon. Thank you.
Good. We'll have somebody for January 12th. That would be great. Okay, at this point, I just call for a motion to adjourn. Christine wants to move the adjournment, so we will be together in the new year. So in the meantime, stay well, have a happy holiday season, and happy new year, and keep reading the material that I sent you